Welcome back to Talking Wizards, where we discuss the magical, the incredible, and at times the difficult. This is our 5th instalment, and today's guest is Aberforth Dumbledore, who will be discussing his childhood, his relationship with his brother, Albus Dumbledore, and the loss of his sister Ariana. Mr. Dumbledore, thank you for joining us.
Aberforth is fine, and thank you for having me.
I think I'm going to call you Mr. Dumbledore. You're sitting here and I'm just feeling all the wisdom emanating from your very being. It just doesn't feel right to call you Aberforth.
Well, by calling me Mr. Dumbledore, you're making me feel old, but go ahead.
There is no other way, Mr. Dumbledore. How old are you, by the way, if you don't mind me asking?
Believe it or not, I am 140.
140? Now that is pretty impressive even for a wizard. What's the secret?
Is there a secret? I'm not sure there is. It's a combination of healing potions and spells. No secret at all, really.
You know, amongst muggles, the average age of death is 83. Is it because of healing potions and spells that magical people live longer?
I suppose you could say that. We have ways of mending things that muggles might struggle with, which certainly helps us live a bit longer. But it's not just that. A bit of luck must play a part. Like you said, there aren't many wizards who are 140 years old.
Do you feel proud of your age?
Nope. It's something that happens without my consent. It isn't a reflection of any sort of talent, so there's nothing to be proud of. It's just my age.
I think I'd be proud if I made it to 140, though I'm not anywhere near as profound. Anyway, Mr. Dumbledore, you're a very private man. Is there a reason why you chose to do this?
Well, it is interesting you began by asking me about my age. I don't know how much longer I have. I felt it is a good time to share some of my thoughts.
Well, you've reached 140, so who knows? I'm sure we can still enjoy your company at the Hog's Head for a good while yet.
Myself, I try not to be so naive.
I think I speak for most when I say that we hope to see you whenever we go to Hogsmeade for as long as we can.
Well, thank you. I hope so too.
Okay, Mr. Dumbledore, is it okay if we begin with your childhood, right at the beginning?
It is the only place to start. Otherwise, much of what I intend to say won't even make sense, so yes.
Let's begin then. You and Albus Dumbledore, who doesn't need any introductions, grew up together. It is common knowledge in the wizarding world that there were some challenges growing up. Can you tell us more about those early years?
Yes, our childhood was certainly interesting. Our family was marked by a mix of immense potential and envy, yet a great deal of turmoil. We had our moments of joy, of course, but we lost our father, Percival Dumbledore, to Azkaban fairly early on, which made things more difficult than they should have been.
Was that because of the incident with your sister, Ariana?
Well, that depends on which one.
The one with the Muggle boys?
It was that one, yes. You see, our sister was a gentle soul. She was very easy to love. When she was very young, she was attacked by 3 Muggle boys, which angered our father greatly. He took matters into his own hand and punished the boys with magic, which didn't go unnoticed. The authorities arrested him, put him on trial, and he ended up in Azkaban.
Did he?
He didn't kill them, no. Regardless, the use of magic against Muggles was illegal even back then.
Was that something she used to experience regularly?
Unfortunately, yes.
You know, it makes me wonder, do you think he did anything wrong?
It's difficult to say. As a son who saw the damage those Muggle boys did to Ariana, I understood why he did it. They broke her, and in that moment, I reckon he couldn't see past his own rage and pain. But did it make things better? No, not really. His actions got him locked away in Azkaban, and that left us without a father. It left Albus, who was 9 at the time, to shoulder the burden of the family at a young age, and Ariana's situation didn't improve because of it.
Can I ask you what kind of burdens he, and I'm sure you too, had to carry?
Things no one should have to at such a young age. Our mother did all she could to maintain the family name and moved us to Godric's Hollow, away from Mould on the Wold, which was where we lived prior to the move. Without a father, Albus ended up managing the practical side of things, like finding us a place to live and dealing with the finances. The emotional weight, too. He had to deal with our grief, our fears, and our struggles, all while trying to navigate his own future and ambitions.
How did all of that affect you?
Oh, in many ways. It wouldn't be wild to say we were forced to grow up far too quickly, and that burden shaped Albus in ways that weren't always easy to see. It's a lot for anyone to handle, and I've always admired his strength and resilience through those difficult times, but it meant that he began thinking in ways beyond his years far too quickly.
Your mother's name was Kendra, right?
Yes.
Did she feel the same way? You know, the way you're describing how Professor Dumbledore's thinking was developing.
Yes, it was clear to all of us that yet to become Professor Dumbledore had grand ideas about how to change the world, and she did used to counsel him to keep his eyes on our family's immediate needs. However, she passed before we reached 20.
That must have been hard to take after being through so much already.
It was, and it meant that our responsibilities increased further, and in a strange way, it also meant we were free to do whatever we wanted to.
In what way?
In every way, but most significantly, we were free to associate with whomever we were charmed by, and were able to delve into any type of knowledge that intrigued us.
Things that shouldn't be meddled with.
Exactly.
We will come back to those concerns later on. Before that, I want to touch on something you said about Ariana, that she was left broken. What did that mean for her?
There was a clear difference between Ariana before and after that incident. After it, she began exhibiting uncontrolled bursts of magic, which were a constant source of stress and danger for her and those around her. The spells and enchantments she unintentionally triggered could be quite destructive.
And what did that look like?
Well, they were truly terrifying. Her magic was like storms she couldn't control, causing destruction to our home, to us, and to others around her. It became a cause of a great deal of distress, which eventually led to her being isolated to protect her from harm and scrutiny. At the time, we didn't know what it was, so we took precautionary measures.
Do you feel like you have a better understanding of what she was going through now?
There have been some ideas floating around.
There have been suggestions that she might have been an obscurial. Is there any validity to those claims?
I'd say that she displayed some characteristics that could align with that. Yes, her magical outbursts were intense and uncontrollable, and her condition seemed to worsen with her emotional distress and the isolation she faced, all of which are symptoms. We didn't have the terminology or understanding at the time, but when I look back, many of her symptoms fit with what we now know about obscurials. It's one of the painful parts of her story, reflecting the broader difficulties and tragedies that can arise when magical children are forced to hide or suppress their abilities, and I want people to know that my dear sister was a victim of tragic circumstances.
I think the listeners will hear you, Mr. Dumbledore. In recent years, the understanding of why obscurials develop has improved and has led to a great deal of empathy.
We don't really know if she was an obscurial for sure. She died before any of this empathy developed. It is my best guess based on what we have learned over the years.
What was the response from those around you at the time?
She died before any of this empathy developed.
I understand. How did the family dynamics impact your relationship with Professor Dumbledore?
The family dynamics didn't impact my relationship with Albus. I believe they impacted us individually. What impacted the relationship was a list of other things, but before I add anything else, I would like to clarify something.
Of course.
As we have already established, I am an old man. I don't know how much longer I will be on this earth. Despite much of what has been circulating about what I think of Albus, I hold a great deal of love in my heart for my brother. There were times I disagreed with him, and there were times I was incensed at the choices he made. Nevertheless, I am not a fool. Like everyone else, I was able to see how he worked tirelessly to right his wrongs. For that, I admire him. It would have been difficult for him to look himself in the mirror and acknowledge his mistakes. It would have been even harder to take steps to redress the wrongs staring back at him.
Do you still feel anger towards him?
I do, but that doesn't mean there is no room for love. We can love those we are angry at. Believe me, I know that very well.
What was it then that created the distance between you both?
Well, as we grew older, Albus became more focused on his academic and grand ideals, while I was more concerned with the day-to-day realities of our lives. Then, in the summer of 1899, in Godric's Hollow, he met someone who was equally as tuned as him in the pursuit of learning, and he developed a friendship with this young man,
Gellert Grindelwald.
Yes. Albus and Grindelwald had some very ambitious ideas back then. They envisioned a sort of magical utopia where they'd be able to impose their vision of order and justice on everyone. They thought that with their superior knowledge and abilities, they could solve the world's problems.
What were the problems they were hoping to solve, and how?
Well, as we all do, they saw a lot of suffering and unfairness in the world and believed that by establishing a new order where wizards held the reins of power, they could create a more just world for all. They thought that the existing systems were failing to address these issues effectively. As well as that, they wanted to eradicate grand conflicts too. They envisioned a world where they could end wars and poverty using their control to bring about peace and stability, and they would talk about these things from dusk till dawn.
I have to say, those seem like very noble aspirations.
They were noble. The goals weren't what I disagreed with, it was the means. They believed that muggles were the cause of much of the corruption and suffering we see in the world, and believed the way to rid the world of its ailments was to place the world of muggles under the authority of the magical world.
I see.
Another part of their vision was to improve magical knowledge and practice. They were fascinated by powerful magical artifacts and spells and wanted to explore and harness these powers in order to unify the magical and non-magical worlds. They believed that by establishing wizarding dominance, they could eventually foster a better understanding and integration between the two communities.
And why did you disagree with them?
I did not, and do not, believe that imposing our will on others, no matter how noble the intention, is the right approach. It seemed to me that such power could easily lead to tyranny and further suffering. The means of achieving their goals, through domination and control, just didn't sit well with me.
I'm assuming that when you voiced your opposition, it created a rift.
Yes, that's right. When I voiced my opposition to Albus, it did indeed create a significant rift between us. Albus and I had always shared a close bond, but my concerns about the moral legitimacy of their plans put me at odds with both of them. Albus, being so deeply invested in their shared ideals, found it difficult to reconcile my opposition with his own vision. My dissent, especially in the face of their growing radicalism, felt like a betrayal to him.
Did it affect your mother and Ariana?
Our mother had passed by then, but it had a significant effect on the care we needed to provide to Ariana. Albus's focus was on the greater good.
I'm guessing the responsibility of taking care of her fell on you.
Yes, and I did the best I could.
How did you cope?
I was 17 at most, and trying to help my sister, who, from what we now know, could have had an obscurus. It was difficult, yes.
Eventually, Professor Dumbledore and Grindelwald began to disagree themselves. Can you explain what their disagreements were about?
It was a disagreement about the use of dark magic to impose their dominance over the world. As Grindelwald became more ambitious, and as they tinkered with new spells and knowledge, he believed he could accelerate the process by the use of dark forces. Then one day, a day I still rue, I confronted them at a time they were in a heated discussion, and a duel broke out between the three of us.
What was it that made you confront them on that particular day?
I was angry. I was angry that Albus was still persisting in making things work, despite the fact that it became clear to him that Grindelwald would go to the very depths of darkness itself for power. It didn't sit well with me that in the face of the evil being uttered, he didn't turn his back on Grindelwald and devote himself to our sister once again.
This duel, Mr. Dumbledore, is well known to pretty much everyone in the wizarding world. Much has been written about it, and speculation surrounding it is rife. Are you able to speak about what happened to Ariana as a result?
Yes, I would like to speak about that more than anything else.
Do you want to tell us what happened?
Ariana was wonderful. She had the purest heart out of anyone I ever knew. She didn't like confrontations at all. In fact, I have always believed that it was the purity of her soul that made it so difficult for her to cope with the hatred she saw in this world. Because of who she was, I have even theorized that it is the best among us who become obscurials, if, indeed, she was one. Anyway, she was nearby. She heard the fighting, and the sight of her brothers dueling must have overwhelmed her judgment, so she approached us to intervene. It was chaotic, and in the midst of everything, Ariana was caught in the crossfire. To this day, I don't know whose spell actually hit her. It could have been mine, Albus's, or Grindelwald's. The uncertainty of that has haunted me ever since, and I know it haunted Albus, and that pain was, surely, the last thing he felt before he died. He showed he had a heart, my brother, in his fight for what was good, in the end. No amount of glory, no amount of knowledge, power, accolades, or admiration can heal such a wound.
I can sense the pain.
A duel, born out of anger and pride, ended in the worst possible way, with a loss that we could never undo.
You are reminded of her beautiful face through the picture you have of her in the Hog's Head. How do you remember her as a person?
I remember her smile. On her good days, when the magic wasn't overwhelming her, she'd smile, and it was like a glimpse of the little girl she should have been, carefree and happy. Those moments were rare, but they're what I hold on to.
How was she on those good days?
She loved simple things, sitting by the fire, listening to stories. I used to tell her tales about the goats I looked after, and she'd laugh. I'd give anything to hear that laugh again. She was kind, even after all she'd been through, and that's how I choose to remember her.
She was lucky to have a brother like you, Mr. Dumbledore. Is there anything you want people to take from her story before we move on?
Yes, I want people to understand that it is never a burden to take care of your loved ones. There were times I resented the duties that befell me. I was young, foolish, and full of wants and desires. Now, when I look back, being close to Ariana, when she needed me the most, fills me with more pride than anything else I've achieved. I also want to remind people something I've already mentioned. It is the best amongst us who repress their magic, the purest of souls, those who find it the most difficult when they are faced with hatred.
That was beautifully put. Mr. Dumbledore, you mentioned that your feelings towards Professor Dumbledore have changed over the years. Was it because of the change you saw in him, or was it because of something else?
As the years went on, I started to see things a little differently. I realized that Albus carried his own burdens that maybe I didn't fully appreciate at the time. He wasn't just my brother. He was a man trying to navigate his own demons, his own regrets. I started to understand that he wasn't as aloof or uncaring as I'd made him out to be. He was haunted by what happened, just like I was, but he dealt with it in his own way. Albus changed too. We know that he defeated Grindelwald and foiled his ambitions in the end, for which I am very grateful.
Grateful that he made the right choice?
No, that would be too selfish. Grindelwald, in my opinion, was even more dangerous than Voldemort. Albus stopped him. For that, I commend him.
Do you want to elaborate on that? In what way was Grindelwald more dangerous than Voldemort?
I'll try. You see, Voldemort was ruthless, yes, and powerful, there's no denying that. But his driving force was his own fear of death, his obsession with power, and his desire to dominate the wizarding world purely for his own sake. But Grindelwald was dangerous because he had a vision, a cause, that went beyond just himself. I saw him speak many times. He was a charismatic leader who genuinely believed in what he was doing. He wasn't just out for power, he wanted to reshape the entire world. He believed that wizards should rule over muggles, not out of hatred, but because he saw it as a necessity for the greater good, or at least that's what he convinced himself and his followers. That's what made him so dangerous. He could persuade people, even those who were good at heart, that his cause was just. That's how he amassed such a large following and why his movement spread so far across Europe. People weren't just following him out of fear, they believed in him, in his vision for the world.
What you say makes sense. However, there are still witches and wizards who refuse to say Voldemort's name.
I see that you are not one of them.
I guess it's because I didn't experience his reign of terror, and by the time I grew up, there were more people calling him by his name, and I just followed suit. But I do notice that those who did live through that period might find it hard to accept that he was more dangerous than Voldemort.
I followed closely what both were doing in their quest for power. Voldemort was indeed more terrifying. He was willing to plunge into the depths of hell to escape death and to instill fear. During Voldemort's reign of terror, I wasn't worried that he will take over the world. I was worried about how many people he would kill. It was terrifying, and we would receive heartbreaking news too often about the names that met their demise at his hands or the hands of his Death Eaters. When Grindelwald was pursuing power, I was afraid he would take over the world. That's the difference. He had a silver tongue, something Voldemort didn't possess. The magic isn't always at the end of a wand. Sometimes the magic of words can be more powerful.
Well, that was intense. I'm not sure what to ask you after all of that.
I have listened to some of your interviews. I guess you should do what you always do when you run out of questions and ask me about the future.
Okay, that was an unnecessary dig. I can't ask you about the future now, even if I wanted to. I'll ask you this instead. How does a powerful wizard like you end up with the Hog's Head?
Well, after everything that happened, I wanted a quieter life. I took ownership of the Hog's Head to stay away from high politics. It was far away from where I grew up in Scotland, not far from Hogwarts. Seeing students as they were given passes to roam around in Hogsmeade reminded me of the wonders of youth and innocence. I didn't want any part of the world of power and politics. I wanted something simpler, which led me to the Hog's Head.
And do you feel like you've achieved that goal?
For the large part, yes. There were, of course, times when I had to stand side by side with others for what truly were greater causes. But all in all, I am happy with the relative calm I experienced during my life.
This was honestly something else. Thank you so much, Mr. Dumbledore.
I'm glad I came, and thank you for letting me speak uninterrupted. It is rare that journalists are able to do that.
I appreciate that. Well, I hope the listeners enjoyed that as much as I did. I was hoping to get an insight into Mr. Dumbledore's relationships with Professor Dumbledore, his sister, and the rest of his family. I got that with the added bonus of what he thinks about Grindelwald. If you agree or disagree, let us know in the comments section below, like the video, and subscribe to the channel. Until the next time, cheerio.